Well, welcome everyone to the Man in the Mirror series. I'm so glad to be with you. My name is Murph Hutson. I am a campus pastor at Hope Grimes. And as Andy said, the mission here is that every man would be filled with hope. And when it comes to this particular conversation we're having today on the unexamined life, I would add that my hope for everyone here is that you would also become more self-aware. That's like the lifelong goal, to know more about yourself, to actually examine your life. And so as we get into this particular series, anybody identify with this? All it takes, right? We get we turn on the social media and something happens. And here's the thing about it: when we look at social media, there's this algorithm that's written. Basically, it's going to show you something that makes you happy and something that makes you angry. Because if I can show you something that makes you happy or something that makes you angry, you are going to stay on the platform. You're going to keep engaging with that. And so we have this reaction that happens in us that wants us to engage in that. And that's part of that looking inside the self and trying to understand what's going on. So when we get to that experience, and just 1 second, hey guys, is there any way to get this up on the fold back? I'm just seeing the Man in the Mirror slide back there. Thank you. So can't identify with this one at all, right? Sometimes we get into this fight over our politics, and it's really interesting to me that what happens is, whichever side you're on, we go, hey, we're right. We are doing things that are righteous. We're doing things that are correct. And the other side is, they're just evil. And if they'd come around to what we're saying, this country would be great. But I find it funny that both sides say that about the other. And so it comes back to this place of what's going on inside. What's happening inside that causes us to get into these fights? What is the piece? Is it something from how we were raised? Is it something from who our circle is? What are those factors that cause us to have these reactions? Maybe this isn't the one for you. Maybe it's this one. I need to defend the church. I need to defend my faith against what I see as this invasion of science that's taking over. It's funny that God's not worried about this one as much as we are. And here's the thing. Galileo, famed astronomer, said this. He said, "Mathematics and science are the language with which God wrote the universe." The people like Galileo, like Isaac Newton, their goal was to actually see through science what God had done in creation. They were trying to understand God more. And somehow today we've got this fight over, well, only one can be right, faith or science. And again, they're not mutually exclusive. This is something that ends up happening inside of us. It's not because this is the fight we need to have. It's because something is going on inside of us that makes us think this is the fight we need to have. And so this is the part about getting into examining our life, examining what's going on inside. Maybe it's this one, right? Once again, it's that they're right, or they're wrong, we're right, and we get into this fight about which way it should go. And I have to ask this question: really? This is the fight we need to have? This is the fight that we're going to just die on, the hill that we're going to die on? It's, again, you have to ask that question: what's going on inside? It's that examining the inside to know what's happening. Because Scripture's pretty clear. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. We can have these reactions that are just visceral. because we're listening to respond rather than listening to understand. And when we're listening to understand, we're actually paying attention to what's going on inside. So whenever you have that reaction, something comes up and you're like, I just want to lash out, or I want to argue this point. A question to ask yourself is why? In this book, the Man in the Mirror, they ask that question. They say, are you asking the why question? Are you asking this question of why? Because sometimes we get operating in this mode of, I need to do, but we don't stop and ask the question of why. And so if you start asking the why question, you'll start actually getting a little bit more sense of who you are and what's making you tick. And it may alter some of the approaches that you take. Because as someone who offers pastoral counseling here at the church, one of the things that I have learned, and any pastor here knows, and any pastor worth their salt knows, is that when you have someone who comes in for pastoral counseling, the issue is rarely the issue. The issue that they come in for is not actually what they're coming in for. It's either the thing that kind of set them over the edge, it was the last straw. It's the thing they think is the issue. So I don't want to minimize that. They believe they're coming in for this particular issue. But when you start digging in and you start asking questions and you start having a conversation, you realize that it's actually a deeper issue that's going on. There's something inside that hasn't been examined. And that thing inside is causing everything else that's going on around them to be falling apart. And so when you start looking inside the self, you see a little bit different perspective. I'll give you an example. So when I was in seminary, they made us do this thing called clinical pastoral education. Basically, you get to go be a chaplain for a summer. And so you go to the hospital, you set up, and I went into this thinking, I'm going to learn how to offer care better. That's what I was really expecting. What I didn't expect was that the whole thing was not about me learning how to offer care, it was about me learning self-awareness. And so I was called to a situation in the trauma room. There was a couple, they had been out on jet skis, and the wife wanted to stay out a little bit longer. Husband was ready to go. He's like, let's head on home. And she's like, no, I just want to go a little bit longer. He says, okay. So they ride a little bit longer, and his jet ski hits a shallow area, and he gets thrown from it. And he ends up breaking a bunch of bones in his body. He is trapped under the water for a little bit. They have to life flight him to the hospital. His wife comes in, and I meet her in the waiting area, and she kept saying this one thing. She kept saying, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. He wanted to leave, and if I just left then, this wouldn't have happened. Thinking that I was giving good care, thinking that I was doing my job, I said to her, no, you can't do that to yourself. You can't blame yourself for this. She seems to calm down, but when she's able to go in and see her husband in the hospital, in the surgery room, she starts up again. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. And so we have to relay stories to our supervisor, and my supervisor says to me, why did you do that? Why did you keep her from experiencing her guilt? And I was like, well, she didn't need to feel guilt. It wasn't her fault. And my supervisor, who was brilliant, said, is that what she needed to hear, or is that what you needed to hear? And it just kind of hit me, and the next thing I knew, I was bawling. Everything was flowing out, and this story kind of comes out of me, and it's like sucking a poison out of a wound. And basically, when my first child was born, his name's Joel, when he was born, about 16 days after he was born, we discovered that he had cystic fibrosis. And cystic fibrosis is a terrible disease, shortens life, affects the lungs and the pancreas. And we started this journey of trying to figure out what all that means. Well, in the initial results that we got, it shows the 2 mutations that my wife and I would have given him because it's a recessive disorder, and they were the same mutation. Well, the doctor said, that's kind of strange because they're rare mutations that you guys would have the same ones that you've given. And so they run off some more tests and discover that they had the test was wrong. Here's the 2 mutations. And my wife doesn't have that particular mutation. It was 2 of a different kind. And so they said that there's this case where one parent can give 2 mutations to their child. And it was my mutation. And so I'm sitting there going, there's a chance that I have been the sole one responsible for my child having cystic fibrosis. And there was a guilt inside of me that I couldn't come to terms with. Now, I thought I'd come to terms with it because, as you all know, especially for those of you that are more seasoned, as you have grief, you learn how to move on from that grief a little bit more each time. It hurts every time, but you know that, okay, I've made it through something before, I'm going to make it through this again. But I thought I'd moved on, and then I discovered, sitting in that room with my supervisor, that I had not moved on, that it was something that was still bothering me. And because of that, I didn't want to experience my own guilt. I was keeping someone else from experiencing theirs. I was trying to keep them from leading an examined life to try to see what's going on inside because I didn't want to face it. It was a realization that I needed, and it changed my perspective from that day forward. If I hadn't done that, I would have continued keeping people from actually being able to examine what's going on inside. So it was a powerful moment for me because self-awareness matters. Self-awareness is defined as the conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. Now, for some of us, we view self-awareness, we have this overconfidence. So we're kind of like this cat looking in the mirror that sees a lion. And we think, well, I can handle this, I can do everything that I need to do. And that's a rare breed. The rest of us have a different issue to face, and it's one that sometimes as men we don't like to name, but that issue is codependency. And so I'm going to make this statement that you may disagree with, and that's okay. I think I'm going to win you over in a few minutes. Pretty much everyone in this room is codependent, and that includes me, that includes Pastor Andy, that includes everybody in the production booth. Everyone in this room is codependent. And when we talk about codependency, we're talking about this attachment to some other person or people that impacts the way we interact with the world. There is an impact on us and how we are. We don't get to be our real selves. We get moved and shaped by others. And so I'm going to give you a list of statements. And here's what I want you to pay attention to in these statements. Can you answer yes to any of them? And if you can answer yes to, let's say, 3 or more of these, you need to start accepting that you have some issues that you need to work through in codependency. So let's begin. Actually, I'm going to come back to that one. Can you move those 2 to after the statements? Thanks. You constantly worry about other people's problems. When someone else acts inappropriately, you often feel guilty or embarrassed for him or her. You struggle saying no when someone asks you for help. You find it difficult to ask for help from others. You remain loyal even if another person or situation is harmful to you in some way. You find it hard to maintain personal boundaries with other people. Other people's approval is very important to you. You've gone into financial hardship to finance another person's responsibilities. You're reluctant to do things that you find important because it may cause conflict. You have the belief or idea that if loved ones would take your advice, life would be much better. You often feel that your mood is affected by your spouse's or significant other's mood. You are in or have stayed in a relationship with someone who hits, belittles, lies to, or uses you. You believe that you can fix or that you caused your loved one's addiction or self-made problems. You keep quiet to avoid arguments. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, only 3? Right? And I understand that. I have experienced the exact same thing. For me, one of the ones that I struggled with and I have to be aware of on a daily basis is the one that says you need other people's approval, right? And when I started volunteering here at the church, as I was beginning the seminary process, I would get asked, can you do this? Can you do this? And I would say, yes, 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 yes. The problem with saying yes to everything is you don't get to say yes to the right things. So because I needed others' approval, I was going on and doing everything that was asked of me, which meant I was neglecting things that mattered in other places. Now, when I'm asked, my initial response, that gut response that I have, is I want to say yes. But I have to stop myself and say, am I saying yes because I think this is critical to ministry? Am I saying yes because this is about helping someone who's struggling in a relationship issue? Or am I saying yes because I think it'll make me feel good to say yes? And I have to pause and ask myself that question. This is where that examined life comes in. It's about understanding what's happening inside ourselves. And so, whatever it is for you on these statements, whichever ones you were able to say yes to, start paying attention to that. Start paying attention to what it is about that particular aspect that causes you to lean in that way. Because what you can inevitably do is trace it back in your life. There's key moments in your life that have led you to acting in that particular way. And so trying to identify what those things are, as I was saying earlier about the guilt over my son was impacting how I dealt with other people's guilt. So trying to identify where those points are in our life that impact us in other ways matters, because once you identify it, once you're able to examine what's happening inside of you, it changes the response. It changes your response going forward, because now you recognize something about yourself. Imagine that somebody was building you a house, and you got to the point of ready to move in, and you had an inspector come by, and they're going to check all the integrity of the structure. They're going to check and make sure things were put together right. And the inspector walked in to the front door and just stayed in the hall and went, yeah, that looks good, you're good, and then shut the door and went on their way. How confident would you feel about that house? How confident would you feel that everything's been checked over before you move in? Or a bridge that you're going to drive over. What if the inspectors came in and went, yeah, that bridge looks good, see ya? How comfortable are you going to be driving over that? But here's the thing. As silly as that seems to us, we tend to do that with our own lives. We tend to engage in a situation and go, oh yeah, I'm good, and not really think deeper about what's happening inside. And when we do that, we're missing the things that we got to focus on. We're missing the things that can cause transformation. Because when we actually examine the self, we learn a lot more about how we react and how we can change how we react. And so we go back to those situations where we think there's those fights that we have to fight, whether it's politics or mass or any other thing. Pick your pet thing that you want to argue about. And now start asking yourself, why? Why is it that I get so angry or fired up over these particular things? Because if the Christian response was different, which it should be, Christ calls us to a different life. If the Christian response is different, it can actually impact others. So, have you ever been sitting at a red light and thinking this? Stupid red light. I'm in a hurry, and you got the second guy there thinking the same thing. But what's going on with the third? Let's not be bothered by this red light. What if that was the Christian response? What if that was the Christian response to the things that we think are so important? The things that we think will change the world, yet in the end, all these things that we tend to fight over aren't going to last. The one thing that is going to last is Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. He's going to be here all the way through to eternity when all the other things fade away. But right now, we have this belief that these things matter the most. But if we are able to examine self and alter that view a little bit and see in each situation that's maybe a struggle for us right now as an opportunity for growth, as an opportunity to see something in a different way, it can actually impact others. So same people sitting at that light, the last car turned on the music. It's like, I got an opportunity to sit here and just enjoy this moment. While the first car is still angry about the red light, the car in the middle is starting to wonder what's going on with the car behind them. Our actions and how we respond to situations impact those around us. Because what I said earlier is that we're all codependent. And that's not just you, that's everyone around you. And so how we react to something will have an impact on everyone else. And so we can impact this world for good or for evil, knowing that not everyone is going to be examining their life. And so how we interact with someone is going to impact them. And when we can impact for good, transformation happens. And when you start to examine your life, you get to examine the real you. The author of our book makes a statement. It says, the visible you is the known you. It is never the real you. The idea here being that what people see may not be actually what's going on the inside. When you react to a situation, what's the first thought? And if your first thought is not something you would want to say out loud, then ask yourself why. Why is this the first thought that's coming out of my head? Because there's something going on inside that needs to be addressed. Author of the book gets to this idea, and it's an important one, that you are not two distinct people. So sitting here in church and sitting at your office or sitting with your family are not different people. You are the same person everywhere you go. But we tend to act differently. We tend to say, well, maybe it's something simple like, well, I might cuss at work, but I'm not going to cuss when I come to the church. Or I might act this way around my family, but I'm not going to act that way around my coworkers. And the question is, why? Why do we feel like we have to act differently around different people? It goes back to the codependency, goes back to this understanding of self-awareness. The author Technology is fantastic when it works. Here we go. The real you is the you that is known by God. And so, how does the real you that's known by God become real to everyone else? Now, for some of you, you may be thinking, I don't want everybody to know the real me, right? Then ask yourself why you don't want people to know the real you and what you can do about that. That's the transformation piece that comes with self-awareness. There's a thing in this book at the very end, they talk about the fish and looking at the fish. Again, this idea of you wouldn't just go to an inspection and go, yep, that looks good, and I'm done. Really examine your life. It will matter. It will matter to your coworkers. It will matter to your family. It will matter to you, and it will matter to your relationship with God. So do not lead an unexamined life, because God is calling us to so much more. Thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoy your time in breakouts today.